Hello, everybody. Back with another case study. I wanted to talk about a car that we had in the shop, and I thought it was kind of interesting that gave a lot of people um a ton of trouble to try to fix this thing. And I'm going to give you a quick background on it. I'm going to try to keep the video as short as possible, but I do want to go through this. Um, it might help some of you guys out there with, I don't know, testing the same vehicle or even with a different vehicle, just as far as strategy and uh, believing in your diagnostics. Let's put it that way, I guess. This car drove me crazy, and I'm going to show you why and what happened. Okay, I don't have any footage of the vehicle, just way too much back and forth with this car, and it was kind of in the shop for a while, and I went to it when I had time, so uh, really didn't want to add another thing into the mix there with what I was doing with this thing. So, okay, let's get started here. It's a 1995 Camry 2.2, right? A lot of you guys, I'm sure, if you're in the field, have worked on these vehicles. If you're in an all makes model type of environment in your shop, uh, very popular car, very popular engine, and there's tons of them out there. Okay, so what happened with this particular Camry uh, drove a lot of people crazy, including myself for a short time. The history on the car is that it was giving the customer a stalling issue. Initially, it would start and then shut off, and sometimes it would just crank and not start at all. Uh, sort of a similar complaint, I guess, on both sides, right? So if it would start for 2 seconds and shut off. So really never got going, but that was what the customer was stating to me. So what happened was the vehicle had gone into a couple of shops over the years, and this is literally, I'm not talking like, I'm not being joking around. This is over the course of 2 years. The car's been there's been attempts made at fixing this problem with the car, and on these vehicles, if you've worked on them, they did have a distributor, and they have two sensors inside the distributor, which they send signals to both of those sensors. Obviously, send signals to the PCM. They are a high failure rate. All right, coil, everything inside that distributor could fail and does fail. Very, very high failure rate on those cars, and it's not uncommon, in my experience, to get a bad one out of the box. So, if I was to tell you that this all ended up being a bad distributor in this car, nobody would be surprised, right? Well, it wasn't the case, not on this car. But I want to go through the history. So it was a distributor was replaced at some point in this vehicle. Now, whether or not that distributor that was changed was good or bad, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like I said, they had a high failure rate, so it wouldn't be uncommon for it to fail. It was an aftermarket. These were all aftermarket components that were put in the car, which understood. That's normally the case with an older vehicle. So, aftermarket name brand distributor was put in. Vehicle was returned to the customer, and the complaint was the same after the attempt at the repair. So, I think at that point they had put a timing belt in the car, uh, thinking that the timing was off on it for whatever reason, and they put a belt in it, and the customer again had the car returned to them, and again the same complaint. So this is kind of a long story. Anyway, you get the gist of this, right? This has been going on. Think about this: for 2 years, they've been trying to fix this car, and it's been in and out of multiple shops. Now, I'm not knocking anybody on not being able to pick up on the problem here. This car was difficult because it was an intermittent, and in a shop environment, a lot of times you try to duplicate the complaint as best you can. The situation that would cause the vehicle not to start, or however you want to phrase it, but it's not always easy to do that. So the customer said that usually when it rains it wouldn't start. So as it happened, uh, I had gotten rain the day that the car was brought down to me, which the first time when it came in, it started. I had no issues with it starting. The customer dropped it off, gave me some time with it, and as it was going, we were doing some basic testing on it. I noticed right away that the distributor positioning was incorrect. So my thought at that moment was either the timing is off because somebody didn't set it correctly when they initially put the distributor in, or the timing belt was off and they were compensating. Well, I wanted to check that first, and I did initially try to drive the car, and as soon as I left my lot, I heard a lot of excessive pinging, on acceleration, and the car didn't run real well. And I says, well, let me set the timing first on it, see if I can, and see where we're at with that. So that's the first thing I did on it, and the timing was way off on this car. I set it, it ran fine. Shut it off, started it, ran fine, started up fine. Let it sit for a while and get cold because the complaint was usually when the car was cold that it wouldn't start. So I let it sit, got it nice and cold and wet from the rain, and went out there and attempted it, and it started right up. And this thing never missed a beat, never had any type of indication of a problem. So the customer needed the vehicle back. I told her to try it, and we'll have to see what happens. I don't believe the car's fixed. I don't believe it was a timing issue, but I'm limited here on time, so she needed the vehicle, so that was that. So she took it, and about, I don't know, 5-6 days later, she called me and complained that the car that morning wouldn't start. It's been running fine up to then, and it wouldn't start. So she had it towed back, and when it got back to me, it wouldn't start. When it got off the tow truck, it would not start. So my partner and I went out there and brought some test equipment with us. And the first thing we did was check to see what we lost, because that's obviously the key to every diagnostic you're going to do is to you like that, right? Is to see what you're losing, then make your decision from there how you're going to go about diagnosing it. So I brought with me an HEI spark tester, a Noid light, and a fuel pressure gauge. We had everything minus injector pulse. Okay, so I've seen these cars with distributors that fail and you have no injector pulse. I've seen these vehicles, if you're familiar with Toyota, use what's called an IGT signal, which is the trigger from the computer to the ignition module, or igniter as they would call it. Then you have an IGF signal, which is the confirmation signal back to the PCM that it has fired. If you lose the IGF on these cars, you may have spark and have no pulse. I've seen that. So you could have a faulty igniter, you could have a broken wire, you could have a multitude of things going on here. So my first indication here was I have no injector pulse. I want to just check my basics and try not to disturb anything. So what I did was I checked for 5-volt reference at one of the sensors, and made sure that my computer was actually alive and I had my reference voltage, which I did. I never lost the 5-volt reference. I then tested I then checked for power at the injectors. Obvious thing, right? Did I lose power? And I again had no issue there. I had power. So at this point I said, well, okay, I'm gonna hook up the scope, and I'm going to monitor. I have a Pico, so I have a 4-channel capability. I'm going to monitor my N signal from the distributor, my NE signal, I'm sorry, from the distributor to the computer. I'm going to monitor my G signal from the distributor to the computer. I'm going to monitor my IGT and my IGF, and I want to see what's going on. So I go to hook up the scope, and the car starts. As soon as I hook that scope up, the vehicle started. So that sucked. I couldn't get this car not to start for a long time. It took hours of playing around with it back and forth, shutting it off, letting it cool down, starting it up, cycling it again, trying it. Finally, the car wouldn't start again. So when it wouldn't start, I still had my Noid light and I still had my spark tester and everything. Still, my test equipment hooked up to this vehicle, so I could see what I was losing. So when my partner cranked it this time, an extended crank, I had nothing. I had no injector pulse, I had no spark, I had nothing. So this was a different uh, this was a different thing now. Now I had no spark and no injector pulse. I did have my Pico hooked up though. And what I noticed was I had no IGT and I had no IGF signal. Well, you're not going to have an IGF obviously without the IGT, I figure, right? So no trigger from the computer to the igniter, and you're not going to have a confirmation obviously back because it didn't fire. So I did, however, have my two signals from the distributor. So my thought that I was losing something from the distributor, or it was going wacky or something, I'm going to have a glitch in the circuit somewhere, that went out the window. I didn't have that. I had a good signal from the distributor. Matter of fact, that's the only thing I can actually show you guys, because I have, as it turns out, my partner has a 95 Camry, which is the same car, basically the same car. And I actually took a reading off of his vehicle. It's a known good, and I wanted to see what if there was any differences in the signal from the distributor that I could pick up on the scope. And when I overlaid them, there's no difference. The signal's perfect. So with that, what did I do? Trying to think here. Oh, the one thing I overlooked here. I'm sorry. I did jump the connector on this thing to get codes out of it. You could jump on the Toyota's E1 to TE1 with a jumper wire. Turn the ignition on, and you can flash codes. So that's what I did. I got a code out of it the first time. I think it was a 14 I got the first time. And I'm not going to go too deep into these codes because they really don't amount to anything on this vehicle. I went through them. I did my testing, and basically the problems that these codes were basically stating that you have a distributor issue. You have a signal problem from the distributor to the PCM. For the most part. So I was at the PCM making my checks just to verify that. I was not at the distributor. I was not at the module. I was at the PCM, back probed with a scope. So if I had lost something, in transition, I had a wire touching somewhere, glitching, shorting, whatever you want to say, I would have picked that up. I was not at the distributor. I was at the PCM. So with that said, I went through the codes. I think the first time I had like a 14, I think was the first time I had a code. Then I did it again. The second time that this car wouldn't start, scanned it again for codes, or jumped it for codes, and I had a code 12. And then I had a code 13 and a 12, and a 12 and a 14, and there was, every time this thing wouldn't start, it had set a different code, or a different combination of codes, which really had me screwed up. So what I did was everything was pointing to distributor, everything. So at that point I says, well, I'm not convinced it's a distributor because this car does have a good signal. The only thing that I know is good is from the distributor. What I'm losing from this vehicle is the IGT, the trigger to the igniter. So like I said before, if you don't have an IGF signal confirming spark on these cars, you will not have injector pulse. At least from the experience I've had with them. And I believe that's 100% correct. They have to see the IGF signal, the confirmation to fire the injectors. So at that point I checked all my wiring going back to the PCM from the igniter. Everything was good there. I checked all my powers and grounds, loaded, and guys, always load test them. Don't take for granted that you have a good ground. Always load test the grounds. They will burn you. They didn't, because they were good. So that wasn't the problem either. It wasn't a bad ground. But what I want to go over here is I was very, very much in, thinking to myself at this point, this thing has a bad computer. It sure seems like a bad computer. You have everything, right? Everything's there. It should work. Obviously your main relay is good. All that stuff is good because you have all your powers and grounds, and you have your 5-volt reference. This car should fire. This computer should be triggering that injector. It should be triggering that igniter. It's not. So my next move was, what did I do? Oh, right. I had my buddy, my partner, crank this thing again, and I was looking for something in the signal. I don't remember exactly what I was doing. I had him crank it, and I was watching the scope. I had no signal, just my distributor, and I said, all right, that's enough. He let off the key. He didn't shut the key into the off position. He just let off from cranking, which means it's key on, engine off, right? As soon as he did that, the car scared the hell out of me because suddenly I had no distributor signal. I had a 5-volt square wave on the IGT, which is what you should have when it's cranking or when it's running. You should have a good 5-volt square wave. Um, this car wasn't running. This car sent out a trigger. Actually, I might be wrong. That might be a 12-volt square. I'm sorry. I'm not sure. You should have a square wave. I don't remember. Uh, I think it's actually. I'm sorry. I do remember. It's a 12-volt square wave. I screwed up there, guys. I'm sorry. I got 5-volt reference in my head. This is going to be a 12-volt square wave. Now, instantly, this thing came on, and you could see in the pattern how quick this pattern was moving. This thing thought it was like a wide open throttle or something, because what it did was it fired. You could hear the spark firing, and you could hear the injectors also triggering. This thing was triggering everything like it was a wide open throttle. Matter of fact, by the time it happened for about 10, maybe 10, 15 seconds before he shut the key off, and that stopped it. I had his trace obviously on the scope. I saw the IGT. So at that point, I was like shaking my head. I was like, how the hell could that happen? This thing. Just so you know, here you're gonna say, oh, the wire was shorted or something. It's not a shorted wire. These these um, these signals from the PCM to the igniter to fire. Is, sorry about that, guys. My phone. These are not a ground side control. These are power side. So this has to send a 12-volt pulse to this igniter to fire the coil. So just keep that in mind. It's firing that igniter. It's triggering that igniter with a 12-volt. It's a pull-up design. Okay, so this was not a short, like a shorted 12 volts. This was a pulse. This was a perfect square wave. So, like I said, at that point, I just shook my head, and he shut the key off, pretty quick. Like I said, 10, 15 seconds maximum, which wasn't quick enough because it actually locked the motor up with the fuel. I had to pull the plugs, clear the engine out, get all the crap out of the cylinders, and, start from the beginning again. Which I could not get this thing to replicate that again. I could never get it to trigger the way it did that one time. It only did it once. And at that point, I said, well, powers and grounds are good. This thing is firing. It's firing an igniter here without cranking, without any kind of input from the distributor. How could that be? So I figure it needs a computer, and I called the customer and explained to her that I should remember to smoke the cigarette if I'm going to light it. I confirmed with the customer, that I believe this thing needs a computer, and that should fix it. So she was thrilled to hear this. They never put a computer. That was one of the few components they didn't replace in the car for this problem. It was great news. How much is it? Well, she decided that she could get the computer herself, which, customers are going to do that. It's, people are always looking for the cheapest way out. I don't agree with cheap. I don't agree with it. I mean, I understand, people's circumstances are different, and that's fine. I mean, I'm not rich, you know what I mean? I kick my own ass here every day to make a living. But the truth of it is, when you buy cheap parts for a car, you're looking to get burned, and that's just the way it is. I mean, there's no way around it. But you got to do what you got to do. So I told her, I said, you have some choices here. You can either go through my source, who I do trust. If it's, I trust his reman parts. You could go to a junkyard. I don't recommend that, getting a used one, but you can on this vehicle. It's not, it's not programmable or anything. You just plug and play. Or you could, go on your own and whatever you want to do. So she decided she was going to buy her own computer. from some source on that I don't know, somebody, one of her family members knew this source because they bought a computer from them. So whatever, she bought a computer. It took about 4 or 5 days for them to ship it, to me, to my door. And once the computer got to me, we plugged it in, cranked the car over, and the car didn't start. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Well, the car had that problem. It didn't start. You didn't fix it. You didn't find the problem. So, right, that's what I was thinking. I screwed up. So I was, kind of at a loss at that point, because I mean, these systems, to me at least, are pretty simple, straightforward. They're easy to diagnose. I've been doing them for forever. I know these cars, but it just didn't feel right. Like, why, it didn't seem right. I mean, I know I checked it. So while I was under the dash, I plugged the old computer in. I didn't touch anything else, just plugged the computer in, cranked it, started right up. So I checked it for codes with the old computer in it, no codes. I plugged the new computer in, cranked it a few times, it wouldn't start. I didn't even bother checking what I lost. I didn't care at that point. Cranked it, nothing. And I checked it for codes, code 12. Back to that again, right? So I said, okay. Well, the old computer, when it doesn't work, I have a code. Sometimes I have a 12, sometimes I have a 14, sometimes whatever. So that was all over the place. I wasn't really too confident with the codes that thing was setting. With the new computer, as soon as I plug this thing in and crank it, it sets a 12 instantly. It's a distributor, problem with the distributor here. So again, I put my scope on it. My signals are perfect to the PCM. And yes, I checked the connections and everything. There's no problem with the connections. Plug the old one back in, crank it. Pattern's exactly the same from the distributor. This time it starts again. So my decision on this was that I have this guy sent me a bad computer, bad unit. So I called him and explained to him that it doesn't work. He said I'll get you another one out. It's happened sometimes, whatever. I said okay. Sends me another PCM, another 4 or 5 days, whatever it was. Plugged it in. Guess what? Nothing. Didn't start. Same thing. Code 12. Dead in the water. What the hell's going on with this car? Plug the old computer in. Fires right up. So now, well, I had a few choice words for the car. The customer's choice of place to buy the computer from. Toyota, just about everything at the moment. I had some choice words for everybody, and I called the customer back and explained to them that this computer as well does not work, and there's nothing here that's missing that I can see. So I told her, I said, just give me a couple days. I want to think this through or whatever. I said, come and get the computer, ship it back, get your money back, and we're gonna figure something out here, what to do. So at that point, I reached out to some friends of mine in the field, guys that I trust, and I always said that, like, sometimes it's good to bounce ideas off of other guys that are experienced. Bounce ideas off each other if you're not sure if something like this is kicking your ass and you're just at a loss. Like, I mean, it's simple. It's an old car. I've worked on much more difficult technology than a 95 Toyota. Why is it kicking my ass? Well, I talked to a few guys that I trust. I don't want to mention names here. Guys might know some of these guys, whatever. I just don't want to put names out there. But these guys are well respected, highly respected instructors in diagnostics and scope training and all this stuff. So when I reached out to them, they immediately agreed with me. You have a bad PCM. There's nothing else. Like, from what I explained is going on. So I was like, well, I said, it's just strange you get 2 bad PCMs from the same place. I mean, it's crazy. They agreed with that too, and just a very like one of them said to me, this is a tough scenario because you checked it right, and you're on the trail of it, and you're on it, but now you're fighting either faulty or improperly refurbished components. God knows what you're fighting here. So I said, okay. I felt confident enough, at least hearing from these guys, that they felt the same way I did, and I went and I ordered the computer from my own source. And I actually explained to him I have a good excuse me, I have a good relationship with this company, and they know me, and I explained to them what's going on and how the customer decided to get their own part, and he laughed and he says, it happens. And I says, I just don't know if it's going to fix the car. I said I don't know if you're going to send me a PCM here and this thing's going to fix the car. So what he did was he offered to send me 2 PCMs. He said, I'll send you 2. Try them. He said, if both of them don't work, he said, it's something else. He said, if one of them doesn't work, then it's possible, whatever, you got a bad computer. But I says, no. I said, you know what? I said, in all the years I've dealt with this company, they've sent me a unit, and I've never had a failure. I've never had a comeback from them. Never had any problems. So I said, just send me one, and if it doesn't work, then I don't know. So I waited 3 or 4 days. Computer arrived, and our car started right up. No codes, no issues. Rain, shine, car's working just fine. And the rain actually had no effect. Just so you know, I try to get every bit of information from the customers. You have to ask as many questions as you can, so you can simulate the conditions that the failure happens. Right? That's our goal, to simulate these things. So she says it's in the rain. It's coincidence that it happened in the rain, because this car was inside my shop and it was bone dry and the car wouldn't start. So there was absolutely no connection with the rain. It's just coincidence that it happens sometimes when it rained outside just as much as it would happen sometimes when it didn't. So it had nothing to do with water. The computer in this car was bad, and I beat myself up over it for days because I just couldn't believe that I got 2 bad PCMs from a company. They sell crap today, guys. I'm sorry. Everybody's got their source of who they deal with and what they, who they trust, and that's great. You have to have that kind of relationship with some of these companies, because you have to be able to rely on somebody. The fact that the internet is out there and you can listen to me talk and babble on over here like a knucklehead, or you can go on and you can search on eBay, or you can search on Google, and you can do this and do that and try to find parts for your car, and just, oh, there it is, I'll buy it, it's $300, cool, and it's junk, it doesn't work. There's a lot of that. I'm sorry to tell you guys, there's a lot of stuff going on out there with this stuff. There's eBay and all these sources that they have out there where they're selling this cheap crap that doesn't work. It's all, you got to be careful. Buyer beware. Like I always tell you, you got to be careful. There's a lot of sources today. The internet opened up a world of sources for everybody, and that includes like the forums where you have 90% of our customers go before they come to us. Right? They go on the forums because they have Charlie has a an M3 BMW, and he goes on the M3 forum because this is happening or whatever, and oh yeah, this guy, yeah, it's this and it's that and it's whatever, and they're wrong. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't mean that because this car is broke this way that your car broke the same way, and the symptom has to be different. It could be the same symptom and a different problem. If the car doesn't start, I've had guys come to me a million times and tell me, yeah, the car doesn't start, it has no spark. How do you know it has no spark? Oh, well, I was on the forums and they keep saying it's this, whatever. I'm like, yeah, but did you check it? No. It's got to be that. Okay. So I says, well, you want me to check it, right? Well, yeah, look at it, see what you can do. And meanwhile, the thing has spark, it's got no fuel pressure, it's got a bad pump or something. So, the guys on the internet don't always know everything. You know what I mean? Nobody knows everything. That's why, I like to do these videos for you guys, because I try to be real with everything. You know what I mean? This is real world stuff. Like this is not the forums where I'm here telling you, oh yeah, I had this Camry, and it was the computer, and that's the problem. It doesn't start. It's a computer, or whatever. How the hell do I know what it is? If it's broke, it's broke. Something's broke. You got to check it and find it. That's why we diagnose things. That's why the forums are garbage that are out there. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. And I could do a whole video on that, so I'm going to stop talking about it. But anyway, my point here is that if you guys are in the field diagnosing, trust your equipment. If it works, trust your equipment and trust yourself. When you've eliminated, everything, right? Everything else, whatever's left has to be the problem. You know what I mean? Like, that's how we determine things, right? We process of elimination a lot of times. And I checked, everything here with this car that I could find, everything. And there's nothing else wrong here. It's got a bad PCM. I don't know why. Not like I could look inside of it and say, oh, whatever, this is the problem. I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with it. It goes crazy though. That's the problem. So what I wanted to show you before I get off here is that I have a hang on one second. Okay, so before I get off here, what I want to do is I want to just show you guys. I have this pattern. If I could get a better view of the pattern. Okay, if you look close here, if you look at this dull red trace and this dull blue trace here, I don't know if you could see it too well on the camera, but if you could see that, that's my pattern from the known good Camry. Okay, and if you look at the other one, the one that's in the forefront here, that is the one off of the car that was failing, off the car that was giving me a problem. So, these patterns are the same. There's no issue with either one of these patterns. You know what I mean? That's it. I mean, this is your distributor signals. Okay, this is the G and the NE signal. So those are the patterns that I was looking at, and I was consistently finding to be the same and good, and never found any problem there. So, like I said, my point here is that you have to trust your diagnosis. You have to be able to really trust it. And I mean, this one tested me, because as much as I knew it had a bad PCM, I kept getting bad PCMs, like, out of the box. I got 2 bad PCMs out of the box. What are the odds of that? So, I don't know. You know what I mean? I never heard of the company she bought them from. I'm not going to mention the name here again, but I never heard of them. Never dealt with them. Definitely will not deal with them again. And, that's it. But this is what I wanted to go through, guys. Like, you know what I mean? I wanted to just talk about this a little bit. And, I thought it was a pretty interesting, car to to diagnose. Thanks, guys.